Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. The other day I did a solo playthrough of Dungeon Quest on my channel, and at the beginning of that video I said that if people were interested I could do a breakdown of the full list of the components for the game. No one really responded to that, but I've decided to do the video anyway, so I guess a lot of people may not be interested in this particular video. But I'm doing it because I have just acquired the expansion for this game, Dungeon Quest Heroes, and as I intend to do a full unboxing of that expansion, I thought I would do a full unboxing of the base game for the sake of completeness. That basically means this is an unboxing video for a really old game, and in order to make that sound more exciting than it is, I'm going to dress it up as I have with other vintage games as a buying guide. So as we go through the components, I will share what are hopefully some vaguely useful tips and advice for buying a second-hand copy of this game for yourself. First of all, it is worth noting Dungeon Quest was published in 1987 by Games Workshop, and it's actually the first English language edition of a Swedish game that originally came out in 1985 called Delackborgen. If there are any differences between the original Swedish version and the Games Workshop edition, I don't know what they are, but this is the edition we got here in the UK. It had two expansions. One was the Catacombs expansion, which introduced a whole new way of exploring the dungeon by introducing a sub-dungeon to the dungeon, and the other expansion was Dungeon Quest Heroes, which introduced some new heroes. This game was eventually republished by Fantasy Flight Games whilst they were working in conjunction with Games Workshop, and unfortunately the first edition of it that they released, they messed with the combat system and they added this convoluted card play system that was very much at odds with the light, breezy, instant death feel of the actual game. I believe they subsequently released a patch for that and introduced a combat system that was more akin to what you got in the original 1987 edition. Regardless, the Fantasy Flight Games edition is also out of print because Games Workshop and Fantasy Flight Games parted ways a few years back. This original 1987 edition was the edition that I always wanted, so I am happy to have this in my collection. With that preamble out of the way, let's dive into the box. The first thing to mention is the rules book. Obviously you want to have a rules book in your copy, but it is important to note that there is a central pull-out section, a Dungeon Quest reference sheet, which actually has details of all of the cards and tiles that are in the game. It is 4 pages total, and some people may have ripped that out, some people may have lost it. So if you are buying a copy of this game on eBay, make sure that this reference sheet is included with the rules. If it's not in there, you will have a much more difficult job playing the game because a lot of the rules for the specific cards are only referenced on that reference sheet. They are not in the rules book. Next up, of course, is the game board itself. It comes in 6 jigsaw pieces. Make sure you get all 6. The game includes 4 heroes, which means you get 4 plastic miniatures. They come in blue plastic as standard, but mine are painted. I didn't actually paint these myself. The copy that I acquired, the previous owner had already painted the miniatures and had done a fine job, which I intend to keep as is. I have no intention of stripping and repainting these. I think they look rather nice. This is Eladarin Shoreshot. He is the ranger. This is Ulv Grimhand the Barbarian. This is the adventurer Volric the Brave, who bravely did a runner in my recent playthrough. And last and certainly least, we have Sir Rohan, master of falling into bottomless pits. Of course, each of those characters gets a character sheet. They're all pretty standard. They specify specific characteristics and then they have the life point tracker. The only character who is really any different is Eladarin, who has a little extra tracker for marking arrows because he has a quiver of arrows that he can use to deal with certain monsters as they arise. You get 2 dice, one 12-sided dice and one 6-sided dice. The ones I have here are definitely not the ones that came in the game originally. I couldn't tell you what colour the original ones were, but I'm pretty sure they weren't transparent. but it doesn't really matter. Any old D12 and any old D6 will do. This game didn't ship with any kind of custom dice with any kind of special symbols on it, so anything like this is fine. You get a selection of Cones of Dunshire. There are 4 blue ones which are used for tracking your hero's health. There is a yellow one for tracking the sun. There is a red one for tracking Eladrin's arrows, and then there is a black one for tracking enemy hit points. You get 115 beautifully illustrated room tiles. I have put my tiles in this drawstring bag. This makes it much easier when you are playing the game. The box itself does not include a bag, but I recommend getting one. You get these 4 cute little ring tokens. The idea here is that at the start of the game, each hero will get to select 1 ring, and these rings are one-use items. There is a ring of healing, a ring of blinding, a ring of warning, and a ring of opening. They all have specific uses. They are all useful in their own ways. Really, you can live without the tokens. The tokens are literally there to be discarded when you use the item. If the rings are missing from a copy, it's not the end of the world. You can use any token you want as a reminder, and the details of the rings themselves are included on that pull-out reference sheet in the rules book. Furthermore, if you have the Dungeon Quest Heroes expansion, or are intending to get the Dungeon Quest Heroes expansion, that expansion includes new rings, and those new rings are in a new format. They made them as little cards with all the rules for the rings on the reverse of the cards. And what they did was they actually made an extra set of cards for these 4 original rings, so that you had all 8 rings in the same format. So if you have the Heroes expansion, or are intending to get it, you will eventually be replacing these tokens in your games anyway, with a much neater solution with the cards. Next, we have one of the bizarrest elements of the game, the inclusion of combat tokens. The combat system in Dungeon Quest doesn't rely on dice rolling. Instead, it's a kind of adapted rock, paper, scissors system where each player has a choice of 3 actions represented by tokens that they have in hand. We have Mighty Blow, Slash, and Leap Aside. The hero will select one of these cards secretly. The monster player will select a monster reaction secretly. They are revealed at the same time, and the different combinations determine how many wounds are inflicted. It's a fine system, it works very, very well, but they included tokens for all of the heroes, so there's a set of 3 tokens for each hero, and then they also included a set of 3 tokens for each monster. Of course, all of these tokens are functionally exactly the same, and at no point in the game will you ever have a situation where you have multiple heroes fighting multiple monsters. You will only ever have that situation where a hero is fighting a monster, so really you only needed 2 sets of tokens. So it's nice to have a full set. If you're a completionist, you will want a full set, but as long as you have at least 3 hero tokens and at least 3 monster tokens, preferably ones that come from a set that all have matching artwork, that would be nice, then you have enough to play the game. Furthermore, these tokens were completely replaced with the Dungeon Quest Heroes expansion, which included 2 sets of cards, a set of cards for the heroes and a set of cards for the monsters, and those cards actually had all of the combat resolutions printed on them as well. It's a much neater and efficient way of running the combat without these tokens. So again, if you have that expansion, you're going to use the expansion contents and not these tokens anyway. And as an added note on those combat tokens, I have actually seen several sets of Dungeon Quest selling on eBay where the actual base game has the cards from the Dungeon Quest Heroes expansion, where obviously the previous owners have bought the expansion, integrated those cards into the base game, and then at a future date listed the game for sale with those cards included. So watch out for that, because they are worth having even if you don't have the Heroes expansion. And if somebody is listing Dungeon Quest with those cards rather than the tokens, I don't think you're missing out on anything, unless of course you are a completionist. The game also comes with 32 treasure counters. These are the counters that you draw when you enter the dragon's lair at the centre of the board. You will draw 2 of these each round that you choose to stay there. 32 in total, but it doesn't really matter, I guess, if you have less. It's very unlikely that you will ever run out. It doesn't really matter what the tokens are. as long as you have enough to play the game. Obviously, it's nice to have all 32, but if somebody has a game listed with a few of these tokens missing, it's not really going to dramatically affect your game. What will affect your game is if you do not have enough of these. These are the dragon counters, and every turn that you spend in the dragon's lair selecting treasure tokens, you also have to draw one of these. If you draw a token with the dragon sleeping, he remains asleep and you get to live to tell the tale. If, however, he wakes up, you're in a world of hurt and will probably die. There are 8 tokens in total, 7 with the dragon sleeping, 1 with the dragon awake. You really do want that correct distribution. You don't want to be missing any of the sleeping dragon ones, because it will, of course, increase the chance of the dragon waking up, will make the game even harder than it already is. So it's important to check that you get enough of and the right distribution of counters for the dragon. That's all of the tokens and counters dealt with. All that's left now are the decks of cards, and there are quite a few decks of cards. What Dungeon Quest does is quite interesting. It breaks up different actions into different little decks of cards, and it keeps those decks of cards small so that you can card count and you can remember what's turned up and you can remember what's still to come. And the more you play the game, the more you come to learn the dangers of the dungeon, and the better you will become at surviving the dungeon. For that reason, it really is important to make sure that you get the right number of cards, the right distribution of cards. You don't want to be missing any of these cards. For example, there are 84 room cards, and I believe 34 of them are empty rooms. If you buy a set of Dungeon Quest and it's maybe got 70 cards in the room deck, and a lot of the ones that are missing are empty rooms, you are dramatically shifting the balance of the game. You're going to make it much harder to win, you're going to make it much harder to survive, and it's going to be a little bit less fun. And it's even more important with the smaller decks, for things like the trap decks and the crypt decks, which have a very, very limited number of cards in them. You want all of those cards to be present. Let's try my luck. Let's draw one of the room cards. It's an orc. Didn't see one of those on my recent playthrough. If on your adventure you find a crypt, you have the chance to search that crypt. If you do, you draw a crypt card from this deck. There are 15 crypt cards in total. They contain traps, treasure, monsters, all the things you would expect to find in a dungeon. Let's push my luck. It's a potion. What's the betting it's poison? Sometimes when you enter a room, you'll find a corpse. I'm actually surprised this doesn't happen in every room you enter, because Dungeon Quest is so absolutely deadly. But if you do come across one of these corpses, then you have the option to search. Just as with the crypts, there is a deck of 15 corpse cards. Let's try our luck. Look at that, it's a necklace. I'll take that, thank you very much. If you find a trap at any point, then you have to draw a trap card. Again, there are 15 cards in the trap deck. Let's see what we get. It's the Shuffle the Deck card. Every single one of the decks has one of these Shuffle the Deck cards, and that's because, as I mentioned before, part of the game is learning the decks, learning what's in there, card counting, seeing what's come out, playing the odds. If you see someone has found one of the most horrific cards in the crypt deck, you know that it's probably safe for you to search any crypts you find. But each deck has one of these Shuffle the Deck cards, which means all of those bad things get shuffled back into the deck, and once again, it's anybody's guess as to what you're going to get. Some of the room tiles you draw will have little doors on them. You can try and get through these doors, but if you do, you have to draw a door card, unless of course you have a Ring of Opening. As always, these doors can be bad. Let's see what we get. Our door opens. And of course, sometimes as you search the maze of the dungeon, you will find yourself in a dead end, or you will find yourself in a situation where you don't want to press on into a room where you know bad things will happen. If that is the case, you have the option of searching the room you are in. You can search a room up to twice before you have to move on and try something different. When you search, you draw the top card from this deck of 15 search cards. Let's see how we do. Check it out, there's a secret door, or possibly a garage. Finally, we have a deck of 15 monster cards. Over the course of the game, you may bump into these monsters, and when you do, you have a choice of actions. You can either attack, wait and see, or escape. Once you've made your decision, one of the other players will draw the top card from the deck, and they will look at the decision you have made, and it will tell you how that monster will react. And that's it, that's your lot. As you can see, quite a lot of components, especially considering the game is so simple to play. It's all down to those different decks of cards really, the fact that they have made a deck of cards for each type of action, breaking up all those actions into little separate options that are a little bit easier to track. But that does mean if you are missing components from the game, it's a little bit more obvious, it's a little bit more noticeable. If you are missing just a single card from a deck of 15 cards, it's very noticeable. It's actually quite a high percentage of the total amount of cards. Missing one card from a deck of 100 doesn't seem quite so bad, isn't going to throw out the balances quite so much. That's something really to watch out for when purchasing this game. Make sure, above all else, you get all of the cards. I guess you can maybe miss one or two of the 115 room tiles and not ever really notice, but I do think you will notice if cards are missing. It's also worth noting that we are dealing with 1987 board game quality here, so the cards are very, very thin. They're actually those cards that you had to punch out of little press out frames. So they have squared corners, they have little nubs where they've been punched out of the card, and they're very flimsy, very easy to crease and fold. I was very, very lucky to have a very clean, hardly used copy of the game with no marks on any of the cards, but any creases or folds on the cards are going to be very noticeable. And again, when you only have a deck of 15 cards, one with a big crease through it is very obvious. It's very apparent that that card is coming up in the deck, and that's certainly going to cause issues in your playthroughs. But there we go, I think that's all I have to say about that. I hope somebody out there has found this interesting or has found it useful and will be able to use some of this information to make a more informed purchase if they are planning to get a second-hand copy of Dungeon Quest, which I recommend you do because it's a lovely game. But anyway, that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.